Maryland Democratic leaders coming out with a budget plan.
I am proud to announce that our administration has reached an agreement on a framework for the final budget.
But critics say it's sparking more questions.
The word framework was used a lot more often than details.
The budget, not the only issue lawmakers have to tackle in the last 2 weeks of the legislative session. Immigration and energy, also big topics of debate.
We know that people's utility bills are too high, and we have to find strategies to reduce those costs.
They've already violated the law by merely coming across the border and being here illegally.
I'm going in depth on the budget and all the work lawmakers still need to do before the end of session. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News In Depth. I'm Mikenzie Frost. It was a busy week in Annapolis between crossover day and state leaders announcing a deal on a budget framework to address the state's growing budget deficit. That budget plan takes several new tax and fee proposals off the table, meaning Marylanders will not see an increase in their snack tax, sales tax, property tax, or added delivery fees. But lawmakers did include a 3% tax on data and IT services, which Republicans are pushing back on, arguing the tax will not help the state's growing economy.
We questioned how could the governor possibly be here and say that he's trying to grow these sectors and then be willing to stand with the Senate President and the Speaker of the House and add a 3% service tax to these. Businesses that are looking to either grow or invest in the state of Maryland will look at these and say Maryland's not the place to do business.
The budget framework includes an additional at least $500 million in cuts on top of the governor's proposal to slash spending. Governor Moore touts the budget deal as the state's largest cut in 16 years. But even with the promise to enter the next fiscal year with a $300 million cash surplus, some questions about how lawmakers plan to get there remain unanswered. With the crossover day deadline behind us,
but this program is different.
Because we literally have hundreds of people in our district.
I would say we were probably one of the more productive and less contentious crossovers than we've had in quite a while.
It's a sprint to Sine Die for lawmakers. And so far, the biggest news is the deal on a framework for the budget.
I am proud to announce that our administration has reached an agreement on a framework for the final budget with the Maryland House of Delegates and the Maryland State Senate.
No one up here wants to talk about cuts. No one wants to talk about revenues.
But that's exactly what legislative leaders, along with Governor Wes Moore, are serving up as this budget deal. Lawmakers were looking at several revenue options to fill in the $3 billion budget hole. In the deal, though, several things are now off the table, like a sales tax hike, a soda tax, snack tax, or property tax increases. While the 2.5% business-to-business service tax is out, a 3% tax on IT and data services is in.
This budget introduces an expansion of revenues on data and IT services at half the rate of the current rate on goods.
And this reform package will help us to bring our tax code into the 21st century.
Republicans argue the framework is so broad.
The word framework was used a lot more often than details, and that's our biggest question.
It leaves the door open for future tax increases as blueprint funding has yet to be identified long term. Do you think that there will be tax increases next year if this plan right now does not address the funding concerns in the future?
Honestly, I don't think this year is off the table yet.
The governor and leaders say the framework agreement includes at least $500 million in budget cuts, though it wasn't immediately clear what was on the chopping block. If you are confident that there is $500 million more in cuts, can you share with the people at home what exactly the state government is planning to cut?
I mean, sure. The agreement includes at least this amount in cuts. He still has to go through all the committees and through each of our chambers.
Look, I think the best thing to do would be, I know this isn't the end of the discussion. It's a whole list of things.
Can you give us an example of one?
Vacancy reduction.
Seat an hour.
Vacancy reduction is a great one.
Happy first day of spring.
Friday, Senate President Bill Ferguson announced the cuts from Governor Moore's budget plan will be adopted. In Department of Legislative Services analysis of the governor's plan, it outlines a litany of cuts, including cuts to the Maryland Native Plants Program, High School Driver's Ed Fund, Construction Education Fund, the Public Broadcasting Commission, and several others.
And so when there are hundreds of small cuts that are going to be made by the committees, those add up to hundreds of millions.
Plus, Senate President Bill Ferguson says a $111 million cut to the university system will be added. And
vacancy reduction is going to be one of the biggest numbers that is above where the governor's budget was.
Can you provide a list of what else could be on the table as these negotiations continue and more cuts could be made?
Well, I mean, I would say as part of the agreement, we've asked the administration, and the administration has agreed to some across-the-board additional reductions. So it is a across-the-board approach to reduce the expenditures by significant dollars in the tune of $100 to $125 million of cuts above what has been identified.
Fox 45 News obtained a copy of the tax provisions in the Budget Reconciliation and Financing Act, or BRFA, where all of the tax increases are outlined, like the income tax changes, capital gains surcharge, cannabis tax hike, implementing a 6% sales tax on vending machine sales, speeding up the vehicle registration fee hike by 1 year, plus an increase on the vehicle excise tax. Senator Ferguson says the capital gains tax changes and the transportation-related fee increases will funnel more money to the Transportation Trust Fund.
I think the Senate's position is really how can we make sure that we are tying revenues that are most closely aligned to infrastructure investment.
More infrastructure investment, along with workforce development, are elements he says companies look for when deciding where to do business, a major concern for the state's stagnant economy. Governor Wes Morris says his goal is to grow the private sector, specifically areas like AI, cyber, and quantum. Republicans argue, though, the 3% data and IT service tax hamstrings that goal.
These types of market signals that the General Assembly is sending out is doing the exact opposite, and businesses that are looking to either grow or invest in the state of Maryland will look at these and say, Maryland's not the place to do business.
As the economy shifts from goods to services, Senator Ferguson argues the tax code needs to evolve, especially as technology becomes more ingrained in businesses' everyday operations.
And it has become, in and of itself, a good. We have to be mindful about taxes. We know that there is a tipping point. I don't believe we're anywhere close to it.
As the budget continues to move, more changes could be made. The first real big debate is expected Tuesday as delegates prepare for the first votes on the House floor. Now, the budget framework also did not include details about how lawmakers plan to fund the blueprint for Maryland's future. Earlier this year, Governor Moore proposed some temporary pauses to parts of the blueprint amid the multi-billion-dollar budget deficit, including a pause on the implementation of collaborative time for teachers and a funding delay for community schools. On Friday, the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee passed a version of some of the governor's changes to the blueprint. The committee's proposal pauses teacher collaborative time for 4 years without cutting funding to community schools. According to our media partners at the Baltimore Sun, Committee Chair Guy Gazzoni says he thinks those funding for community schools will help the blueprint succeed. But senators may consider scaling back that funding in the future. Earlier this month, the State House of Delegates passed a different version of the blueprint, which also keeps those funding increases in place, but with a shorter one-year pause on teacher collaborative time. Democrats largely blaming the Trump administration for the state's budget crisis, arguing Maryland must increase its revenue sources because it can no longer rely on the federal government. While a recent Moody's report shows Maryland is at the greatest risk of federal job cuts, the state's budget deficit was projected before the president took office.
The president has launched a reckless trade war with our allies, including our largest trade partners, and those tariffs could mean over $2 billion impact on our economy and directly harm our people.
The cost we may bear to the Trump administration's destruction is what I've been thinking about the most as we've had to make critical decisions on how best to balance our budget and, importantly, prepare for our future.
But critics argue Democrats are to blame for the budget crisis, pointing to the blueprint's costs.
Donald Trump did not pass an unfunded mandate in the blueprint current program. Yes, there are other things he has done to cause a decrease in revenue, but when Kerwin was passed by the legislature years ago, there was already no money for it in the first place.
Now, another issue not immediately clear in the current budget framework, growing the state's size. Since Governor Moore took office, Maryland has added nearly $250 million in state government jobs. The budget plan right now does not include a blanket hiring freeze, which Republican lawmakers argue would help cut back on spending. But Senate President Bill Ferguson says the vacancy reductions will be one of the largest cuts in the final budget. Joining me live now to discuss all of this news is Delegate Kathy Szeliga. Delegate, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here with you in studio.
Absolutely. So do you think that these vacancy reductions will be enough to address the deficit, given the other cuts that we're seeing included and the tax increases in the framework?
So, you know, we have to remember when government says a cut, it's not really a cut. It's a decrease in the increase. So what we have here is overspending by state government. You can look historically over the last 20 years, and the rate of increase of the state budget far exceeds the rate of increase of our population. So what does that mean? A larger and larger bill handed to each and every Maryland resident, because we're not growing our economy, we're not growing our population, yet spending continues to grow at double what it really can sustain.
Now, speaking of growing the economy, the 3% tax on IT and data services remains somewhat of a mystery when it comes to exactly what this tax will apply to. What's your understanding of what will be subject to this new tax?
You know, it really is kind of a mystery, and you know, they will tell us, I guess, tomorrow. We understand the budget will be in a reprint version that we can all really read. Tomorrow, I've been asking for that. I've been asking for the cuts. Like, show us a list of the cuts. Don't just talk about them, you know, but we want to see exactly where you're cutting. Listen, you can't say you want to grow AI in Maryland, grow our budget, grow our economy through jobs, and then tax AI, the very industry that you're trying to get here. So that doesn't make sense. When Martin O'Malley was governor, they did a similar thing. They tried putting a tax on IT services. You know, was it Netflix? We all weren't sure what it was. And then they repealed it before it went into effect because they realized it's really a net negative. It won't really bring money to the state.
Well, so the Senate president was asked specifically about that when it comes to taxing this industry that the governor has really made a priority in terms of growing for the state's economy. He says that it won't have an impact on that. We'll have to wait and see, I guess, if that really bears out in the future. But is there any concern that this tax will actually impact Marylanders, residents, and their everyday budgets?
I think it will. Look, they are talking about the largest tax increase in the history of our state. And you know, we all know it flows downhill. It's going to impact every single one of us. So are these subscriptions you need to keep your computer running? Are these Netflix subscriptions? Because technically Netflix is a data service. You know, is it YouTube TV? What exactly are they going to put a tax on? And then again, how are you going to get those industries to come when you're promising to tax them?
I want to ask you about the Trump administration. We know that the Democrat leadership continues to say that this is a result of what's happening in Washington. We also know that Maryland is at the largest risk of some of these cuts to the workforce. Do the cuts and do any of the decisions being made by the Trump administration concern you about the state's future and the budget?
Of course. I think about $20 billion of the budget comes from the federal government. So, of course, we're concerned. Look, I know people who have unfortunately lost their jobs. I think we all do because we have so many federal workers here, and we're concerned about that. When Governor Hogan left office, he had $4.2 billion in a reserve fund. That's what the reserve fund is for. Unfortunately, when Governor Moore came into office, he spent most of it. So, you know, we were saving for a rainy day. It was sunny, and they spent that money. So, you know, now they're grappling with these taxes. Look, when Martin O'Malley was governor, these are recycled ideas. The high earner tax, the digital or IT tax, both of them did not work. When Governor O'Malley and the legislature passed the high earners tax, the state actually lost $1.7 billion in revenue, and more than 30,000 people left our state. And when these, you know, wealthier people leave our state, they take with them all their philanthropic donations to the zoo, the BSO, to schools, to libraries, to things that fortunately wealthy people do contribute to. So this isn't just another bad idea. And what we really need to see is to rein in spending, not just continue to spend more.
We'll have to see it as this debate continues. We're expecting to see some of the debates and votes later this week. Delegate Schlegel, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, still to come, crossover days come and gone in Annapolis. We'll take a look at which bills passed, which didn't, and how those decisions could impact issues important to you. Monday was crossover day in Annapolis, the last chance for most bills to pass into the opposite chamber for a chance at becoming law. But bills addressing the state's energy crisis did not make that deadline. Instead, Senate President Bill Ferguson says the leadership in both chambers agreed to focus on a package of 3 energy bills in the final weeks of session. He says lawmakers agree on the broad points of the energy package, but are still working on the finer details, including how to lower Marylanders' energy bills.
We know that people's utility bills are too high, and we have to find strategies to reduce those costs. And so the high level is full agreement. It's really in the details. It's in the particular proposals and how they would play out.
Throughout session, the Maryland Freedom Caucus has spoken out about lowering energy costs for everyday Marylanders. One proposal, the Climate Solutions Affordability Act, would have amended the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022 to ensure state requirements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions were carried out in an affordable way. That bill also would have repealed the Empower Maryland charge, which is a fee residents pay to help switch their home's energy source from gas to electric. Delegate Mark Fisher argued the measure could provide immediate relief to Marylanders struggling with the rising energy bills.
We're saying to the governor, if you want to lower energy bills right now, then the best way to do that is to take Empower off of people's bills, which he could do and the legislature could do right now and lower people's bills by $50 a month, $100 a month.
Governor Moore did respond to a letter from the Freedom Caucus asking him to consider rolling back the Empower charge. He told the lawmakers not to bring short-term solutions that don't address the long-term challenge of energy. Another bill on the table, the Energy Equality Act, would have repealed Maryland's low-emissions vehicle program and prevented the government from restricting goods based on the energy source used to power them, such as gas-powered leaf blowers. Neither of those 2 bill proposals passed into the opposite chamber. The Maryland Freedom Caucus also focusing on juvenile justice reform this session. One of the proposals would have changed the laws surrounding how school systems are made aware of students' criminal records. House Bill 588 would require the Department of Juvenile Services to notify school officials if a student is arrested for a reportable offense and provide those students with educational services. That bill did not make it to the Senate. Another proposal cross-filed in the House and Senate would end automatic charging of young offenders as adults, instead starting about 75% of those cases in juvenile court. Only the most violent crimes would remain in adult court. That bill did not make it out of either chamber, but the bill's sponsor, State Senator Will Smith, stands by the plan, and he wants to keep advocating for it.
I'm a very big proponent of the version that I put forward because I think it makes for a more efficient judicial process. It's going to save our state $17 million. Most of those kids, if not all of them, are coming back to the juvenile system anyway, so we're just wasting time and getting worse outcomes. It's a clear case of we're paying more for less and worse. So I'm a huge proponent of that bill, but I'm not quite sure this year it's going to move. I'm not sure.
You want to see it move next year? What would it be, the 3rd time?
I will advocate for this bill until we get it passed.
Another focus for lawmakers this session is immigration. A few immigration bills did make it past crossover day. One proposal would require state officials to create guidelines for how ICE agents operate in sensitive locations. That plan passed the Senate. If that bill becomes law, it could be seen as a direct violation of President Trump's executive order allowing ICE to operate in these so-called protected spaces, such as churches, schools, and hospitals. I asked Senator Smith, who sponsored that bill as well, about concerns going against Trump's orders and how that could potentially negatively impact the state.
Do you have any concerns about the potential impact on federal funding if it's viewed as a direct violation of the orders from the president?
I don't, because the bill requires a judicial warrant if you're going to go into a private location within a public space, meaning this space that's not publicly accessible.
The Trump administration has previously threatened to withhold federal funding from any jurisdiction that does not comply with federal immigration orders. Another immigration bill passed the House, which would ban ICE's 287G program in the state. The program allows local law enforcement to access prisoners ICE detainers. Right now, ICE operates under 287G in Harford, Cecil, and Frederick counties. Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWee says he's working to implement 287G in his jurisdiction, arguing it's important for public safety, despite what he calls disinformation surrounding the program.
They've already violated the law by merely coming across the border and being here illegally, so they've violated federal law. If you've committed a crime, we'll check your immigration status, and then we'll communicate with ICE. And if ICE makes the determination, they make the determination, not the local detention center, on filing for deportation than they do to send you back to your home country. So I think there's a lot of disinformation.
Officials in Garrett and Washington counties have also pledged to implement 287G. Joining me live now to talk about the impact all of these bills could have on the state and what's left to do for lawmakers as we enter the final stretch is political analyst John Deedy. John, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So let's put this session into perspective. We have just over 2 weeks left. We have this budget framework deal on the table. How would you describe what lawmakers have done so far?
I would describe it as chaotic in many ways, because until they get the budget taken care of and know where the money is and the I's dotted, T's crossed, all these other things related to juvenile justice, related to energy, and all these other things are really on the back burner, because you can't budget for A and then say, well, we'd like to do energy, but we don't have enough money for that. So chaotic is the best word.
Speaking of energy, I mean, we don't have much time left. We haven't really seen these proposals move in either chamber. Do you think that the state will get any of these ideas through?
I talked to a couple people in the legislature last week, and what they told me was these are priorities for leadership as far as Ferguson and Jones. They will get done, but they want to get the budget stuff taken care of first. As far as dealing with the thing that's back after crossover day, that's a mere formality, really, because the Democrats control the legislature. They can change the rules and engineer things a lot faster. They are a priority for both of them, so they will get done.
It seems like the budget and the energy package will be the biggest issues as we enter these final few weeks. What are you looking for as we go into this week from lawmakers in terms of the budget and specifics? Is it time for lawmakers to provide the public with specifics that are included in this budget framework?
I think the specifics are the most important thing I'm looking for, because right now it's been all vague as far as everything. Senate Leader Ferguson has basically talked about, well, we're going to trim a bunch of stuff and we're going to make these little cuts here and there, and here. The problem is it's like a tree. You know, if the rot is at the root of the tree, trimming off the branches isn't going to solve your problem. And I think that what happens when I think about this is if you are receiving money from the state, I would right now assume 5% less later on, because I think in July what's going to happen is the Board of Public Works, they're going to look at education. They may start to cut things, assuming revenue will decline from the Board of Estimates. So right now, if I'm somebody who gets state money, budget for less. Even if they tell you we're giving you $1 million, budget for $950, because things can change fast. Don't assume because someone's promising something that you're going to get it.
Certainly. We'll have to keep our eyes on Annapolis. It'll be another busy week. Thank you, John, for joining us live to discuss everything as we enter the final stretch.
You're welcome.
Now, last week we asked what you think lawmakers should prioritize in the final few weeks of session. We'll take a look at some of your responses when we come back. Last week, we asked what you think lawmakers should prioritize in the final weeks of session. Let's take a look at some of your responses. We have Nora saying, stop taxing Marylanders to death, stop all of the fees, cut expensive programs, and stop spending. Linda says, stop taxing us to death. All right, thank you for joining us. We'll keep our eyes on everything as Annapolis continues to get busier.